Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Massive news for the LEC. Great news, in fact. Sources. Natus Vincere set to replace Rogue in the LEC starting with the summer split. Which is kind of crazy to do this in between splits. Apparently, there is nothing known, according to this article. No concrete information concerning the future of Rogue's players or its coaching staff. Obviously, due to German labor laws, you are very well protected as a player and a coach because you're an employee if you are in the LEC, of course, and Navi buying the slot of Rogue, I think obviously they're going to inherit the contracts. Seeing as Rogue do this deal here in the middle of the split, I don't think they're negotiating from a point of power because they've been signaling that they want out of the league as soon as possible. They just want to cash out, peace out, because obviously they are bleeding money dry, and I wouldn't be surprised if the value of the slot is also going down considering the climate of esports. So I imagine that Natus Vincere actually got this quite cheap. If we compare it to the price that KC got it under, KC, of course, bought their slot, 66% of the slot at an evaluation of £23 million. Right? So in terms of that price point, and when KC got in, I do think and imagine that the LEC spot should be cheaper now, especially knowing that Rogue tried to sell to Falcons, they tried to sell to Nigma Galaxy, and of course they created the roster insanely last minute because they were in big trouble. They tried to sell and Riot declined Falcons and so forth, because in the end Riot wants partners that contribute a little bit more than just money to the league, and I don't know if they are ready to make the plunge to join with Saudi money within the LEC. We have EWC. Maybe it takes a couple of years until Saudi money takes over completely. But nevertheless, I have it on good authority that Navi already, as an org, for those who don't know, this is an org, there's a lot of history in esports. They've been around for a very, very long time. Them coming into the league is a very good thing because obviously they have pride and honor, something that Rogue clearly lacked after winning that split in 2022. I know that they have some offices already in Berlin. They're going to be running with some of their own people, but we don't know what the roster is going to be looking like, right? In terms of their potential, what they can do in such a time span between spring and summer, the availability of players is definitely tough. And the question is if they want to spend money now to have an impact, or if they're going to just wait for an off-season and make it big then. I do think from a strategic point of view, it does make sense for Navi to kind of stabilize and to figure out, their base and their office and their setup and everything that they need to succeed, and then make, some big moves in terms of the off-season market when there is more possibilities, of course, available. I think that in terms of building the roster, I wouldn't be surprised if they retain the majority of the players that are currently playing, because if you remember, when Rogue signed these players, I think a lot of these players are, of course, on just mercenary contracts, and that's cool. In terms of Rogue, I don't think that they've necessarily only done negative things. When they came into the league, they took over for Rocket. They retained the majority of those players from Rocket. They, of course, introduced, through their academy system, they introduced Inspired, Larson, which, of course, have had a pretty decent impact. They brought in, of course, Hans Sama from Misfits. They built a very formidable roster. This roster made playoffs for the first time in summer, together with Vander. Coming into 2020, they made some changes. They brought in Trimby, another player that came from Academy, and Odoamne took the place of Finn after they made a Worlds bid, back in 2020. 2020 was also a year where, this roster was insanely competitive against, of course, the strongest European team of all time, taking G2 to 5 games, where, Larson actually played things like Akali. 2021 also, they didn't make, a massive splash, but still, they were very competitive in the league, and we saw a lot of good sides to this organization. It was very, very competitive, and I remember competing against Rogue, that this is a team that, you look out to beat. This is a team that was definitely competitive and a part of the top teams in Europe due to the likes of the performances of Hans Sama, an Inspired, a Larsen, and of course, Odoamne. In the end, Hansama left, of course, to Team Liquid in 2022. Inspired left to EG, where he won, of course, North America. 2022, everyone thought that, ooh, they just lost some of their strongest players, if not their strongest players. And they, of course, brought in Comp and additionally Malrang, who was the substitute jungler for Canyon coming out of Damwon at the time. We saw some games from Malrang in Damwon because there was a situation where basically they needed to use a sub, an emergency sub, and Shomik was playing AD, Canyon mid, and Malrang was jungling, and that's how they put together their roster. And this, of course, was the peak of Rogue, where he won the summer split. That's always one that pains me super much, because I thought that one was super winnable. But in the end, Rogue did it with, definitely like rebuilding in a year where everyone expected this team to be a lot worse after losing some of their key players. I think deserves praise, but this is where Rogue entered into a partnership with Koi, and I don't know the exact details, but the relationship between Koi and Rogue, of course, soured in the end. Ibai, in the end, left, and there was, talk about how he needed to spend so much money out of pocket, and he was misled by Rogue and so forth, and it seemed like the people on the Rogue side wanted to make some kind of an exit from esports, and there was some philosophical, let's say, disagreements between Koi and Rogue. So that was, of course, a tumultuous year, 2023. After moving from Odana to Shigenda, this is where the suffering started. They didn't really do a good job here, They even went so far to trade Trimby. You guys remember that trade? That trade, the Trimby Advian trade, which was absolutely nuts. Trimby was not happy on Rogue because his team was heavily underperforming, and Trimby went to Fnatic, and they did a pretty damn good job, because Fnatic at the time, if you guys remember 2023, Fnatic was in complete shambles. They had the Reckless and the Rux roster, and then they replaced Rux with Advien, and nothing changed. And we had the whole Nexus situation where Reckless could have hit the Nexus, and then they didn't, and lost to Mad Lions, and didn't go further into playoffs. And then somehow Rogue ended up in a position where they traded Trimby for Advien. And on paper, that's a horrible trade. But maybe they were just being nice to Trimby, because Trimby got freed from a very, very underperforming team. 2024 was no different. Watching Rogue was just a torture ritual, and I think everyone watching them in the world saw this as a hallmark for the failure of franchising, a team that simply didn't care enough and didn't give enough back to the league, and definitely were a bottom feeder. In a non-franchise system, this is a team that, of course, would be eliminated and replaced. And between 2024 and 2025, they tried very, very hard to, of course, sell the spot. And as I mentioned before, some of the bids were declined, and there were active rumblings about Navi. And, in the end, it happened. But I do think that Rogue, as many other teams in esports, they tried to figure it out. They tried to do it their own way. They couldn't do it. Esports is inherently super, super difficult. And I don't want to just stand here and dunk on Rogue, because I do think that they brought us some very, very cool players in Inspired. They made Hansama shine on the team. Trimby, of course. Larsen as well. Some very, very strong players. And they won the LEC once. They had some solid Worlds performances. 2022, they did manage to make it into the quarterfinals. They got stomped there, but they did manage to make it, which is cool and all. But now they're gone. I think the timing is a little bit spooky, but I hope Nasus Vincere take the time to plan things out and do things right in summer, and set out to make an ambitious, play to be a big player in the league. I think the key thing here is that Navi carry, so much esports pedigree that it would be very, very shameful if they wouldn't be competitive or have, they don't present a very, very sound idea in terms of what they want to be within the league. If Navi is in the same position as Rogue were in terms of the standings being at the bottom, that's not something that Navi would ever accept. I have a fun anecdote that I can end on. Is back in season 3 when I was playing and preparing for the LCS EU qualifier together with Team Solo Mebdi, the number one org I was in contact with to join as we would qualify into the LCS EU was actually Navi. We were supposed to join together in forces if we qualified, but obviously Team Solo Mebdi was a team where 3 players got permabanned, not me. 3 players got permabanned, so that meant that we got disqualified from the event. This is the infamous Jensen, Darkwing Jack's story. But Navi was the team that we were supposed to join together with. I was talking with the owner, and we were very, very excited. We needed a team to pay for our trip to IEM Brazil right after the LEC qualifier. That was very important to us. But in the end, with the ban, it seemed like Navi kind of probably decided we dodged a bullet there. Let's not join League of Legends esports until 12 years later. So there it is. Obviously, Navi were in League of Legends for a little bit. There was a point in time where they played, I believe, even OGN. They had players like Aranea. They had Cotton X, Nesrilas. I remember Citizen Wayne was a very, very strong player. And if I remember correctly, they did, in fact, play in OGN. Let me see if they did. So we have Champion Summer. They lost to, I don't even remember this logo. Startail Bombers. Damn, Startail. They was played against Startail and then Zenix Storm. And then CJ Entus, which is crazy that the one team that they beat was CJ Entus. But it is what it is. Navi is back in League of Legends esports, and I'm personally excited. I think it's a very, very good thing. I think it's very positive. There he is, Zero Gravity. This is the man that I communicated with at the time. And wait, the manager of the team was my former manager that went to Splice? I had no idea. That's crazy. The world is very small. I love this guy. He's super, super cool. This is Hans. He was our team manager at Splice. Nevertheless, I think that's a good point to end the video. Esports world is small. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.